To a lot of people, what the defense was doing this morning might have seemed like asking standard, boring questions. But what he was actually doing is something else, I think. He was continuing the cross-examination of the forensic scientist that they ended with yesterday, and he was asking her questions this morning like, do you change gloves frequently? You clean the area? They were questions about preventing cross-contamination. And at one point she said, well, we clean, we're careful. Almost like she was anticipating some sort of an attack on the lab. And we know, and she knows, sometimes that happens. Defense lawyers do that. But that's not where he was going. I think he's making sure that the jury hears how easy it is to cross-contaminate. Because I think he's still on that cake box theory. At one point, he even asks about her how she takes her gloves off away from the evidence. I'm going to play this clip.
Correct. I wouldn't want my, be coughing on an item or sneezing on an item.
Or even getting some of your skin cells on it, right?
Correct. I'm just the basic of not getting anything of my biological material onto a piece of evidence.
Fair enough. And if you take off gloves, I assume you do it away from the item itself, right?
Yes, and I'm turning them inside out as I'm taking them off.
Is it, from your training and experience, can some skin cells actually shed just by flipping the gloves off, the latex gloves, from that action alone?
That I don't know.
Isn't that an interesting question? No, you don't think so? I think so. And here's why. Yesterday, and actually previously, he kept going on about where the basketball net was at Jennifer Dulos' house. And whether, when the kids were playing basketball with Fotis, was the garage door open or closed? I think he's trying to still come up with a reason why Fotis' DNA might end up in the garage or in the house. I think this is ludicrous because we're talking his skin cells would have to fly off, float around for a couple of days, float into the garage. After it's exposed to sunshine, they had a sprinkler system that would have destroyed anything laying around, right? There's dew. We don't know if it rained. There's sunshine. DNA doesn't last very long outside. Now, I'm not a forensic expert by any means. I only know what I've picked up from work. But it seems ludicrous. If Fotis had handed Michelle the cake box 2 days prior to the crime, and she had placed it on the table and left it there, away from direct sunlight, and there's no humidity in the house, and nobody's disturbing it, nobody else touches it, I could see maybe finding his touch DNA on that. But that's not where it was found. It was found on a high-touch area that is frequently cleaned. He was in that house. There's no doubt. And he keeps referring to touch DNA and skin cells. And I want to point out that DNA is DNA. DNA is found in every cell of your body. So the DNA found in Jennifer's kitchen could have been saliva. You know, if he wiped his mouth and got saliva on his hand, could have been oils from his skin, could have been skin cells. It's DNA. So it's not necessarily epithelial cells that were just floating around for a couple of days and decided to land on the faucet a couple of days later. I think he's planting seeds and planting seeds. And to the jury, it probably all sounds boring as heck. He asked about the cutting taken from one of the seats in the Tacoma, and he's asked if there was an absorbent foam. You know how upholstery is, it has the foam behind it. If there was any of that, and there was. And did you look at that? And she said she did. And he asked her, did you notice from any of that cutting any blood-like stain? And she said no, she did not. It wasn't blood. The reason he's asking that question is because the police said it was a blood-like stain or that there were staining. So there's that implication of tunnel vision again. That's what I think that's about. The prosecution on redirect got up and made the witness explain yet again why they don't do confirmatory tests for blood. Both the prosecution and the defense talked about how bleach can destroy biological material. The next witness was another employee from the lab. And I'm sorry, I'm looking down because I took notes and I won't remember all this without my notes. The police had seized, if you'll recall, these black husky gloves. And what's interesting to me is that if you recall, in one of Jennifer's interviews, she said, it just sort of in passing, Fotis lost his gloves. And so he was using my gloves. And then he kept using my gloves because he lost his, and I ended up buying him new gloves. So that point may or may not come into play. I don't know. So they looked at the black gloves. They swabbed the interior for DNA. They found blood on the exterior in multiple places, and they went through this whole process with both gloves. They were swabbed for DNA and sent to the lab. And this testimony took quite a bit of time because they were going through each sample and each stain in the process and all that. The key points are there were staining. They did screening tests, which came back positive for blood. They took DNA of the interior of the glove, which is important. Then they looked at the towel. Remember the bloody towel? They found what she called a hair-like fiber upon examination. It turns out that actually was a human hair, and it had a root. The hair was examined. The root was sent for nuclear DNA. When it comes to the towel, I guess it's going to depend on where that towel originated. If the towel was Jennifer's towel, we can expect to see DNA and hair from anyone who lived in that household or any guest who might have been there and used that towel. If it came from Michelle and Fotis's house, the same thing. Anybody who used that towel, we can, even after laundering, because, hairs get stuck in those things. It could be anybody's. It could be the daughter's. So that by itself wouldn't be necessarily conclusive unless it was somebody else's whose hair we would not expect to find on that towel. So she didn't say what the results were as to whose hair that was. So we're going to have to wait and see for that. The Tacoma door panel. Very interested in this. They found trace material. This was sent to this witness, this trace material. They found human hair and they forwarded the root for DNA, and she examined the hair and confirms it is human. The Tacoma carpet. Remember, this is all from the passenger side. The carpet, so there were two pieces to this exhibit. One was the mat, and one was the actual carpet. They ripped it right out. The carpet itself was screened for blood, for the presence of blood, and tested positive. The mat did not test positive. After break, they continued with the same witness. On a plastic bag they found it turned out to be a human hair with the root. They retained the shaft, sent the root to nuclear DNA. On something, the way it was described was on the item labeled poncho, and she was specific to say it that way. So I'm not sure if this was the poncho with the hood or that bag that was cut out to look like or to function as a poncho. They found a hard whitish material. They didn't go into any more detail about that. They also found a hair-like fiber. It turned out not to be a human hair. It was a blue fiber. Now, that could be anything. And she didn't say bright blue, light blue, anything like that. So we don't know anything more about the blue fiber. But two things ran through my head right away. One was that in Michelle's police interview, she had at one point said she thought Fotis was wearing a light blue shirt on that day. Later on, she said it was light. So I'm not clear on whether she's actually remembering or was she guessing or what. The other thing that popped into my head was the Tacoma. Was that carpet more blue or gray? The mat was blue, but the mat came back with no blood on it. And it could be, those things could have nothing to do with this fiber. We'll have to wait and see what it gets matched to, if anything. They examined the sponge. Remember the sponge that was found in the garbage they described it as with plant-like debris on it. And I'm going to differentiate because there's another sponge. There's 2 sponges. They found staining on that sponge and it screened positive for blood. They took cuttings, they sent it out for DNA. Then they swabbed the yellow area of the sponge, trying to avoid the stained area to see if they could get other DNA from that sponge. Then they showed a rubber and fabric glove. This is different from the other gloves, the husky gloves that we saw. This one was described as a gardening glove, and they'd only found one. They swabbed the interior for DNA. The exterior screened positive for blood. That was also sent to DNA. There's something that keeps jumping out at me through this. There was a poncho, an actual poncho, and then a bag that was cut out to function like a poncho. There's going to be 2 sponges. There's evidence, blood evidence, on the passenger side of the Tacoma, more than 1 pair of gloves. So there are 3 gloves, 1 full pair, and 1 individual glove. It may turn out that the gardening glove is not related to the pair of gloves. We don't know yet, but I'm seeing 2s. I'm seeing indications that there was more than 1 person involved here. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. Is it possible that whoever wore the poncho also decided to put on an extra layer of protection and used a bag? That the same person used more than 1 sponge? Certainly. There would be a big mess to clean up. There's still a lot of evidence yet to come. The mop handle screened positive for blood. They swabbed it, sent it for DNA. The garbage bags with the black tape, remember those? Inside one of those garbage bags, which was not torn, they found a different sponge. It looked the same as the other sponge. I think it's important that that sponge was found inside a closed bag. There was no blood on that. They did swab it for DNA. They found a hair-like fiber on the scrubber side of this sponge. Turns out it was human hair and it had a root attached to it. The root was sent for nuclear DNA. Remember the knotted bags? Well, there was one that was torn and it was knotted and it had that black tape on it. She swabbed underneath the knot. Inside the knot, she found a hair tangled in there. And it was a human hair and it had a root. So that was sent away. Those bags tested positive for blood. Look, there's blood all over the place. From the sticky side of that tape, that black tape, she swabbed for DNA. She kept the hair that was found in the knot of the bag. Then cross-examination. 3 guesses as to what the defense focused on. Presumptive tests. Confirmatory tests for blood. You got it. And again, he asked about procedures and cross-contamination. And I think these witnesses think that he's being critical of them, but that's not what it's about. It's the cake box. That and the issue that a lot of these items were found in the city garbage. I mean, when I saw items in the garbage, I thought, oh no, cross-contamination or outside contamination is going to be one of the arguments. First, it would have to be. So he actually shows a picture of the garbage can. He's trying to drive home this point that, look, it's in a city garbage. It could have been cross-contaminated by anything. And I think he's wrong. Yes, could it be cross-contaminated? And yes, could there be all kinds of material on this evidence that has nothing to do with this case? Just like we saw with that red stained t-shirt, turned out to have nothing to do with the case. Could that happen? Yes. But that doesn't fix anything for FOTUS. And here's why. If any DNA, any hair, any blood coming from any member of Jennifer's household or Fotis's household is on that evidence, especially in the knotted bag that was not torn. If there is anything from either household, how do you explain how that got there? You're not going to convince anybody by saying, well, you know, it was the city garbage. Anybody could have thrown it out. Did the nanny go to Hartford and throw out trash? We saw Fotis on camera throwing out the trash. And that bag that was unopened, if that bag, let's say, came from Jennifer's house, if the nanny's fingerprints, let's say, were on that bag or even in that bag, it still points to Fotis. It came from Jennifer's house. And who's the connection? If Nicole or Michelle's DNA or Michelle's mother's DNA or fingerprints were found on that bag, what does that tell you? It tells you the bag came from Fotis's house. And we saw on camera Fotis throwing the bags away. So whatever's in that bag, especially the knotted bags, it came from Fotis. Like, I don't know how you could argue something different. It's not like they were all using all of these connected people were in Hartford using this common receptacle. It's not like there's some question of some unknown individual. Did some unknown individual go and kill Jennifer and then drive to Hartford and drop off the garbage, and Fotis happened to be dropping off garbage all in the same receptacles? Come on. Yes, there can be contamination from other things, so it would be contaminated by things that have nothing to do with the case. But if any DNA or hair or fiber from any of the players involved is in those bags, it came from Fotis. Then the defense went on about the hair that was found on the sponge. It was flattened, 0.7 centimeters long, this little hair. So again, if the hair had come from anybody who frequented Jennifer's house or anybody in the household, or because the office is attached, the workplace of Fotis's, then we know that came from the bag that Fotis put in the garbage. And that was pretty much it for today. They didn't talk about who any of this matched to. We're not there yet. Trust your gut. I'll see you in the comments.